G'day, welcome to the Australian Property Podcast. I'm Pete Wargent from Wargent Property Buyers, and I'm here with Amy Lunardi, buyer's agent extraordinaire down in Melbourne. Amy, how's it going?
Really good. Extraordinaire. Love that word, Pete.
Yeah, that's about as far as my French goes. Yeah, Amy, everyone keeps asking me what's happening in Melbourne and Victoria.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, it seems to
People
be...
are interested in us again now that things are happening again.
Yeah, and I think as well, probably because when you look around the traps, it's probably the relative value, certainly as compared to Sydney, but increasingly as compared to Brisbane and Adelaide and Perth. Melbourne seems to have some sort of decent value for money, and plus the auction clearance rate seems to have turned round. There was a 9-month high this weekend. So I guess you're down there and you're on the ground and active in the market. What are you seeing down in Melbourne?
Yes. So rewinding back a little bit, the last few years have been pretty slow, pretty soft in Melbourne. And especially towards late last year, not a lot happening, very, very slow market, very much a buyer's market, but then buyers still just having like a really lack of confidence buying last year. And for that reason, everyone was sort of sitting on the fence and saying, well, we're getting towards the end of the year. I find this often happens towards Christmas most years anyway, where November and December, everything just starts to everyone loses interest. They've got other things happening. And I have found over the last 10 years, the best buying opportunities have been in December. Not a lot of choice, but if something great comes up, then I often find there's much less competition. But then coming into this year with the rate change, well, first of all, even before that, I did find that there were way more numbers out at inspections from the get-go in January. And that does tend to happen most years because everyone comes off after a break and say, it's a new year, it's a new property, let's get refocused. We've been wanting to buy or we want to enter the market. Let's go and have a look around. So there were definitely more numbers. But then as soon as we had the rate cut, here in Melbourne, it was like a light, had switched on overnight, and things absolutely have picked up from then. So more people at auctions, more offers being placed, properties selling quicker, overall prices increasing. Now, this is not across the board. So this is not every single property in every single location. However, overall, the trend has been stronger clearance rates, stronger prices, and way more situations of properties selling far beyond like runaway prices, which didn't happen last year. It wasn't happening over the last few years. So that's been my experience in Melbourne. However, this has also then translated into a lot of vendors actually then thinking all of a sudden their property is worth far more than what it really is. So I have still seen a lot of pass-in situations. I have still been speaking to a lot of real estate agents who are really just trying to manage their vendors' expectations right now to say, yes, we've seen improved sentiment, but that doesn't translate into a 10% rise in your property's value in the current market. And then to cap it off as well, coming into Easter this year and Anzac Day, because we've got the two public holidays very close together this year, which doesn't happen every year. It just means that we've got a really big lull happening. A lot of people are going to take advantage of that break, go away for 10 days. And for that reason, we've just seen a real slowdown this month in listings. And I anticipate that's going to bounce back at the end of, April and then coming into May.
Yeah, so I was looking at the Cotality chart pack, CoreLogic as was for this month, and I was just looking at the listing numbers, and as you said, it normally drops right off towards the second half of December, and it's basically very little listed over that period of the year. But I guess March has already been and gone this year, and I was just looking at the historic trends, and definitely things drop away through April. Maybe not quite as extreme as you'd see over the Christmas break, but there's definitely not really so much stock to pick from, certainly in terms of new listings as you go through April. And it doesn't really start to pick up again until the spring selling season. And of course, meanwhile, in the background, there's a lot of turmoil happening on global markets. Probably by the time this goes to air, it's probably changed again. So I don't want to say too much because it'll be dated very quickly. But yeah, I guess in terms of market pricing, there's definitely been a shift in expectations for interest rates to the downside. And
Yeah.
if that happens when there's not really much new stock coming on, I guess it could fire things up a little bit in Melbourne,
Yeah.
as you said, after a fairly lackluster few years.
Yeah, exactly right. I had one client in particular who's only just started working with me 2 weeks ago who called me up and said, "Oh, predictions of further rate drops. We should buy sooner rather than later." And I said, "Of course. Well, that's our intention, but we're not going to just buy any property for the fear of the market changing because we don't. First of all, we've just started looking, but then because we don't know what's going to happen, we just always still then need to focus on." What we're looking for, our property brief, sticking to those goals. And then if the market does shift and we have to change expectations accordingly, we will do that when the time comes. But right now, for the last couple of weeks, a lot of my clients' itineraries every week have had a lot of off-market properties and a lot of pre-market properties. One client, for example, this weekend, their itinerary is 100% off market properties because there was nothing online for me to send them. But through our calls this week, we've managed to find them quite a lot of off market options, or that's also some pre-market properties that are coming up for sale in about a month, but we have the opportunity to see them beforehand. And this just highlights the importance of, if you're a buyer out there in the market and you don't see much going on online, there's still a lot of stuff that's happening in the background that you can't see. And the only way you'll know about this is to be tapping into and calling and connecting with all of the real estate agents and, giving them your brief and being really clear, making sure that they know that you're being realistic. And just, I call it polite nagging, Pete. I do that every day. 50% of my day is polite nagging.
Yeah,
At
I've got a
home and
brief
at work.
as well at the moment. Yeah, I've got a brief on the Sunshine Coast where the search area is very small because it needs to be in a specific location and there's not really very much listed at all close to the beach. So, yes, a lot of nagging and phoning around. That's actually quite topical because one of our questions today from listeners relates to somebody who's been searching for a while and can't find the right property and it feels like prices are moving. So we'll come on to that shortly. So yeah, we're just going to do a bit of a listener Q&A today. As always, do send in your questions. Chris and I cover 2 or 3 of these each week on the weekend. And then periodically we do these listener Q&A episodes. So Amy and I today will get through as many of your questions as we can. So let's kick off then, shall we? So first one from Angus Young. I assume that's not the actual Angus Young. I think it's probably a pseudonym, but here's the question. I'm looking at buying a townhouse and a lot of them I've been inspecting are brand new. Should I even bother with a building inspection? Doesn't insurance cover any defects anyway? So Amy, what would you recommend in that situation? Because I guess when you've got a townhouse on a strata titled property, for example, there's certain things that the building inspection will manage to cover internally, but potentially across the development, you don't get everything covered. So what would you normally recommend to a client in that situation?
Firstly, I would always recommend a building inspection, no matter how new or how old that property is, unless, of course, you're going to knock it down and then you might not bother. But a building inspection, first of all, if we're looking at these newer townhouses, yes, they will have some common area, but a building inspection can be pretty thorough because unlike an apartment, the building inspector should be able to inspect most of that property. So a brand new property will still often have little bits and pieces here. We call them minor defects. I have had an instance once in the past with a brand new property that had a major defect. The building inspector identified something that just wasn't built properly. It wasn't built to code, and we had that rectified. And that's pretty uncommon, but you do want to understand if that's the case. But there's often a lot of minor defects. And when a builder or when a developer gets to the very end of the project, and I encountered this myself when I was doing my townhouses, there's just often a lot of little bits and pieces that are either missed or not necessarily completed yet. I inspected one yesterday, for example. It didn't have the toilet roll holders. It didn't have a lot of little fixtures and fittings installed, and the real estate agent hadn't even noticed. So a building inspection will go through and be able to highlight all of these in a big list, and obviously then point out anything more major if they uncover it. But then from there, what that means is that you can have the opportunity to potentially have those things put in the contract to be rectified prior to settlement. And it's just easier to have it in the contract as a condition to say, here are the list of items plus photos, and you have to work with your lawyer or work with your legal rep just to make sure that this is documented really clearly, and to say, well, I like to have it said in the contract to say this will be done no less than 7 days prior to settlement. So essentially when I'm doing my final inspection, you don't want to say before settlement, because then in theory they could, do it up until the last day, and how are you going to check? And then also have a bit of recourse in there to say, if these things haven't been done, you can withhold up to X amount of dollars in order for it to be done. There's all different ways that you can have this clause put in there. So you've got to negotiate that with the agent and the vendor, and then go through your lawyers. But rather than settling and then having to go back to the builder and developer to get these little fixes done later, because yes, that's what you would do, but it's a bit harder once you've settled. The builder might not call you back in time. The tradies might be delayed just because there's not this money being withheld or this, imminent penalty involved once you settle.
You would assume that a brand new building would be perfectly finished, but it's by no means always the case. I've even seen a new townhouse where the firewall wasn't completed, and a building inspector actually picked that one up for us, which I wouldn't have done by not going up into the top of the building. But
you don't climb on the roof when you go to a property, Pete?
I do occasionally clean the leaves out of the gutter at home, but that's about as hard. that's about as active
more than I do
as I get at my age. Yeah, you got to watch out for the snakes as well. But as you said, there's very often minor defects. It's just human nature, right? Builders want to get projects finished as quickly as possible, and that sometimes involves a job that's near enough is good enough. So I guess, generally speaking, better safe than sorry. Get one done. And it goes back to one of those first rules of investing. Rule number 1, don't lose money. And sometimes that mindset of not losing money is just as important as trying to make money on an investment. Or even if you're buying a home for that matter, you don't want to find out there's a significant defect that you could have had covered off. Of course, there's a cost involved to getting a building inspection, but sometimes that's just a necessary part of the transaction cost when you buy. So,
like you said earlier, Pete, the building inspector isn't, if you're buying an apartment, they're not going to be looking at all of the common property. They're not going to be climbing on the roof of the apartment, etc. There's always going to be limitations. So understand what the limitations of the building inspection are before you engage one. But the second part of this question, where Angus Young said, doesn't insurance cover these defects anyway? I think that there's a pretty common myth about, what's called builder's warranty insurance. Now, I work in Victoria. I wish I knew the legislation of all states and property in all states, because I know our listeners are nationwide. But here in Victoria, there is something called builder's warranty insurance. And I think a lot of people think, if there's something that goes wrong with the property, that's what that insurance is for. And it's not the case. Builder's warranty insurance in Victoria only covers you for defects, first of all, up to 6 years, but only in the event that that builder who built the property goes insolvent or has died. So, it's like a last resort insurance. First of all, if there is a problem, you have to work with that builder to fix that issue, whether it's minor or major. And then it's only if they have got insolvent or died that you can then claim on that insurance. So it's like, it's the last resort situation. Otherwise, you're really relying on having a decent builder to come back and work with you to fix these things. Otherwise, there's other avenues you've got to go down to, like the mediation avenue, and it can be quite complicated. So all the more reason why building inspection at the very beginning is really important.
Good advice. So I think we've got a bit of a musical theme going this week, because the second question is from Kate Bush. So here we go. I almost feel like giving up. I've been trying to buy a home for the last 11 months. I feel like I'm getting nowhere. I have a decent budget, but now I'm feeling even more disheartened as I've noticed the market has gone up a bit recently and there's even more competition. So it doesn't say on the question specifically where that is in the country,
Maybe
but
Melbourne.
I mean, it could be to some, probably anywhere except for Hobart in the capital cities that might apply to. Maybe Canberra is a bit cooler at the moment, but yeah, as a general rule, I suppose the interest rate cut does get more people interested in buying and more people at the open home. So yeah, of course, it can be tough if you've been searching for a while and not got the result you wanted. What would you say to a buyer in that situation, Amy?
So first of all, I would say that in my opinion, 11 months is quite a long time to have been looking for a property. I know that first of all, when people are working with a buyer's agent and when they're working with us, our average time frame is 2 to 3 months. And it's very, very rare for us to take longer than 6 months to help buy for a client. But I'm aware that when you're not working with a professional, well, naturally it could take a bit longer because you've got to figure out what you're doing. And, sometimes people take breaks and then they come back in. So 11 months of looking might only have been 6 months of actively looking. But I would say in that situation, you need to identify first what the problem is. So Kate hasn't mentioned, has she been actually putting offers in on property? Can she just not find what she wants to buy? Has she been bidding at auctions and just missing out? Or is she bidding at auctions and they're going 10% over? Because there are some situations where you are actually doing everything right and then you're just having a little bit of bad luck. So for example, if what you're wanting is coming up quite often and you're having green lights all the time, in other words, properties that you want to pursue, but you're just missing out, that's really frustrating. But that does signal that you're actually on the right track. Versus if you can't find what you want and nothing's coming up, that's an indication your strategy is wrong and your expectations are not aligned. Or if you're going to auctions or making offers and you're missing out by quite a bit, that's also a suggestion that your expectations aren't aligned with market prices. And then what's happened to this person now is the prices have increased more. So that gap is getting wider. So you've got to identify the problem at the very beginning. Is it an expectation issue? Is what you're looking for very rare? Are you not appraising things properly? Are you not getting ready quick enough? And if a great property is coming up, it's selling before you have a chance. Are you not being confident in your decision making? So you're not actually getting to the point of putting offers in. We don't know what this person's problem is. But you've got to figure out what is my actual issue and then how do I address that? Because 11 months is quite a long time, especially if you haven't actually been, submitting offers or going to auctions.
It can certainly be mentally challenging and quite draining, I think, if you're spending your weekends looking at properties at open homes and then missing out on them. So yeah, I think that's very good logical advice from Amy there. So yeah, start with your budget and your research. Try to be realistic with your expectations. I think
that's hard sometimes.
Definitely. I think whenever it comes to a big purchase or an investment, I think what you really want to avoid is that fear of missing out, because that's when people make an emotional reaction. That's when people can make knee-jerk responses and overpay or potentially do something that they live to regret later on. So you need to try and keep a level head still, despite the challenges you've faced so far. And of course, you can always seek some professional help if required, if you need just some advice or a buyer's agent or somebody on your side of the transaction, of course.
And a buyer's agent won't, if you just say your problem is the searching and you can't find what you want, a buyer's agent can help with that searching and refining your brief. Or if you feel like you've got that under control and you just need help with that acquisition phase, like the due diligence, the negotiations, they can help with that too. So often buyer's agents will have different levels of service. So depending on what your problem is, or maybe you don't know what your problem is and you just want to come to a buyer's agent and say, well, what am I doing wrong? I will speak to a lot of people at the very beginning and help problem solve at the start. And I'll say to them, I think I can add value here. Or I might just give them a little bit of guidance and say, go see how you go for the next month or two and come back to me if you still need a bit of help as well.
Well said. Okay, and good luck with the search. Okay, quick one. Third question from Igor. I wanted to ask Pete why he blocked me on Twitter. I don't believe I offended him, but apologies if any comment was poorly perceived. Igor, apologise. I can't remember. I've actually got over 15,000 followers on Twitter. I've had a few instances where I've had people blocked, and I don't think it was anything I did. I think it was maybe an algorithm or something. So unless you abuse
Oh,
Tottenham
yeah, sure,
Hotspur,
Pete. No.
yeah, I don't think it was anything personal. I've unblocked you. So
I thought I included this question because I saw it in the spreadsheet and I thought it was pretty funny. But you know what?
yeah,
I think that social media, I mean, we're in property. So I think if we were in a different industry, there would be different kind of like challenges to face. But, that's the good thing about social
no,
media,
this
I
is
guess.
yeah,
You
you're
don't
right.
need to have negativity in there. If I'm not sure Igor wasn't negative, but
No, it's a fair dinkum question. This is for real. And I checked back to our previous interactions. I don't think there was anything anything
sorry,
untoward.
Igor, you're back.
I'm
You're
watching
back in
very
Pete.
closely though. So
You're
yeah,
back
no, it's
untweeted.
I waste way too much time on
Oh,
that
sorry,
website.
it's called X now, isn't it, Pete?
It is called X, yeah, formerly
Yeah.
probably Twitter when I did the blocking. So okay, let's get back onto the property question. So from Marge Simpson, what's the risk of my real estate agent acting as a dual agent for me as the seller, but then also acting for the buyer? So I think just to clarify here, so I think some selling agents in real estate do also at times work as buyer's agents for clients. And actually some fully licensed buyer's agents periodically offer a service that's known as vendor advocacy. So they're not actually in the process of selling the property, but they might just assist in that process in terms of overseeing the selection of the estate agent and just making sure the process runs smoothly. I think what's the
Let me just
risk
comment
of
on that, Pete, though. The
for sure.
first situation there where you say some selling agents will be acting as buyer's agents, they're not in the true sense buyer's agents in that the buyer's not paying them. So they might say to you, hey, Pete, I know you're trying to buy a property. I'll help you look for something. But they're only showing you properties that their real estate agency has for sale. So they're still acting for the vendor. They're
Not
just
very
helping you
independent.
because in some real estate agencies, they're going to get paid if they sell a property to you, but they're still being paid by the vendor. They're just incentivized to cross-sell within their real estate agency or within their real estate agency network versus a true buyer's agent who is being paid by the buyer and never the vendor. It's illegal for them to be acting for both a vendor and a buyer and charging both the vendor and the buyer.
Yeah.
So if I had a client I was helping sell a property and I actually had a situation a while ago where a client was interested in not something I was helping sell, but I knew the vendor, I knew them. And even that, it wasn't technically a conflict of interest, but I just felt like I shouldn't be even involved in any of that. So I actually told that buyer to use another buyer's agent in that sense. So there really needs to be a very distinct separation between vendor and buyer. And the most important thing is to understand, well, who's getting paid in this instance and who's actually working for me.
I think the thing to watch out for as a buyer, and I've seen this more times than I care to mention, that, I mean, so we work as buyer's agents, but we're independent. We only act for the buyer and we just charge a fee for service. That's typically how it works. But I get people come to me and say, well, I went to see this guy and he said he'd do it all for free. He won't charge me. And he's found me this great property, and 99 times out of 100, it's an off the plan apartment that hasn't been built yet, somewhere in an area where there's loads of apartments going up all over the place. And they say, look, it's a free service, I won't charge you. But of course, what they're really doing is selling you a property. And the way they get paid is by the developer, quite often a 5 or 6% commission. So if you think about $1 million apartment, they might be getting a 50K incentive to sell that apartment to you. So if you're not being charged a fee, it's very often the fact you're basically the product. That's the way it usually goes. And
It's a great
of course, the agent in that instance is fully incentivized to then come up with loads of charts and statistics to show why this is the perfect apartment view. Even though you could buy any one of the 11 million properties in Australia, you must buy this brand new one that I can get a commission on. So I think, I mean, that I've thought for over many years as to why this hasn't been closed down, or at least better regulated. The only thing I can think is that it does help developers to shift pre-sales, and therefore it does help with new construction and therefore the government is not really that incentivized to clamp down on it, because in the end they'll be getting stamp duties and so on. But you just need to be really clear about who's acting for whom and how they're getting paid. And if somebody says they'll do something for free for you, it's very often that white knight approach is very often a big red flag that you're being sold to. And the commission, it'll be in the small print somewhere, but it's very often 5 or 6% or something of that nature. And in my experience, good properties don't need people to be selling them with big commissions, because they'll sell themselves. So you just need to be very careful in that instance.
Yeah, and with this question, I would say also, if you're engaged a selling agent to sell your property, they should be helping the buyer. They're not working for the buyer. They're not being paid by the buyer, but they should be helping the buyer in terms of facilitating that transaction. Like, the goal out of all of this is, yes, to get the best price, but to get you offers, to get buyers through the door, to help them put offers forward. So there should be a mutual, there should be a level of service that they're absolutely providing to the buyer, but there shouldn't be any incentive, for example, for that agent to do anything for that buyer that is not in the best interest to that vendor. And I know that this happens, very, very, very occasionally, in that a agent might sometimes favor a certain buyer because maybe that buyer has something to sell. So it's a sales-based industry, it's a commission-based industry, and there are perverse incentives out there sometimes for people to not act in the completely ethical way. And this is why it's just really, really important when you're interviewing agents, when you're selecting an agent, to feel really comfortable with them and maybe ask around and get referrals and have trust in your agent. Because if you don't have trust in them, it's going to be really hard for you to take their advice later on when the decision making needs to be made.
I think you better answered Marge's question there. So thank you, Amy. So let's do one more question for today. We're running a bit short on time. So a question from Ben. Hi, guys. I'm now in a position where I'm wanting to get an investment property to start my portfolio. I'm wanting to do this to create equity to help buy our forever home, as well as creating a future for our family. I'm looking at a 5 to 10 year strategy for creating compound growth. I would need to get a mortgage if we were to do this as a buy to let. That's the first part of the question. Secondly, I also have the opportunity to co-invest with my partner's mum, who wants to do something with her cash. This would mean the ability to not have to get a mortgage. My concern is that I'll be losing out on the compound growth in the years to come, as she would obviously need a return too. I guess my question is, which route do you think would work best for equity and future growth? Well, let's tackle those in two parts. Firstly, if you're looking to do an investment for 5 to 10 years to create some equity and then down the track buy potentially your forever home, I think one of the issues with Australian property, probably more so than in some other countries, is that you do have quite a significant stamp duty and transaction costs. So you might pay about 5% of the property price as a stamp duty payment, depending on your circumstance and which state. And then you've got other costs that we've already talked about, building and pest inspections or legal fees and so on. And then when you come to sell, those estate agents will want maybe 2 or 3% as well when you come to sell. Then you've got capital gains tax and so on. So you said a strategy.
And your holding costs in the meantime, Pete, in a lot of states.
Too. Yeah,
in a lot of
right.
states, if you're negatively geared, you could be, backwards 5, 10, 20 grand a year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So even after tax, you might have sort of a negative carry or holding costs over that period that you own the property. So you said you're looking for a 5 to 10 year strategy for creating compound growth. I mean, I guess the nature of compound growth is that it's like a hockey stick effect, and generally the best returns come at the end. It's a bit almost counterintuitive, but it's almost like a snowball rolling down a hill. And 5 years isn't really typically long enough to create compounding or a compounding effect. You might get a boom phase of the property cycle and increase your equity, but it's not really a compounding investment. Plus, you've got all the transaction costs. So I think a 10-year time horizon is better than 5 in that circumstance. And of course, you may have a change of circumstances in the meantime. That means you could hang on to that investment property for the long term, and you could maybe buy your own home anyway without having to sell the property. So, Amy, do you have on that first point, do you have any thoughts on sort of holding periods? At what point does it not become worthwhile for an investment property? Do you think it needs to be, a full property market cycle to make it worth the effort?
Well, I think that it's really difficult to answer because we've seen situations where, property cycles, we can have the booms and the peaks and troughs within only a couple of years. And then it's very much reliant on luck as to when you've bought and sold that property. So you could buy a property and then something dramatic can shift in that market. In even a year or two, it could be worth significantly more or significantly less. So as you've said, Pete, all the more reason why having a long period of time can help to smooth those risks out. And if you're relying on a strategy for only 5 years, then what it means is that depending on what happens in the market and depending on where you buy, you could actually end up going backwards. So you're not only not achieving that strategy, but you've got to almost catch up from where you've started, because just say you've bought that property and the market's gone down in those 5 years, or it's done nothing. And then all of a sudden that property owes you all of these extra costs, holding costs and stamp duty, et cetera. Then at that point in time, if you have to sell that property to free up borrowing capacity to buy your home, you've gone backwards. So with any kind of investing, you're taking a risk. But with property investing, because of all these transaction costs involved, having ideally, a minimum of 5 years, but probably more towards that 10 plus years, that's really more of an ideal holding period for a property. So definitely when we're considering this question, I think timeframes are the most important thing to consider. And just to understand, okay, well, if this strategy didn't work, you bought it, you wanted to hold it for 5 years and, it ended up owing you more money or you've gone backwards, what are you doing in the meantime to try and counteract that risk? Are you increasing your borrowing capacity, increasing your savings? Don't just rely on this property being the solution to then being able to buy your family home in the future.
Perfectly well said. Thanks, Amy. Well, there's a second part to this question as well, and that is I also have the opportunity to co-invest with my partner's mum who wants to do something with her cash. This would mean the ability not to have to get a mortgage. My concern is I'd be losing out on the compound growth in the years to come, as she would obviously need a return too. So the question is, which route do you think would work best for equity and future growth? Look, I mean, as always, it's an it depends question. My view is the first approach is better for a few reasons, probably. Look, there's always challenges of investing with other people. You've touched on some of them: different goals, different risk appetite, different potential timeframes. If you're younger and she's older, and so on. The ability to buy property without a mortgage means you sidestep potential financing challenges, but then of course you're not getting the benefit of the leverage. I mean, it's really the leverage that makes residential property so attractive to people. And of course, leverage magnifies your returns on the upside and the downside, so it comes with its own risks. But I would say if you're not going to use a mortgage, there's probably less value in going into residential property. Now, as I said, this will probably have completely changed by the time this goes to air, but for the first time in a while, the S&P 500 in the US, the world's sort of premium or premier stock market, is in a bear market. Just went down, just touched an over 20% drawdown. So there's definitely going to be opportunities to invest in other asset classes, you would think. As I say, probably completely changed by the time we broadcast this to air. But then you wouldn't have the same issues with financing, and you don't necessarily. I mean, it's a much more liquid asset class. Then I think the thing with residential property is, as we already touched on, it doesn't work generally quite so well as a flip or a short-term investment because you've got so many costs involved, and if you're not getting the benefit of the leverage either, all of those additional challenges of investing with other people could become a bit of a headache. But what do you think, Amy?
Yeah, those are great points, Peyton. Especially what you said at the start with different ages and when you're buying with other people first, like I'm sure that there are plenty of people that have done this before successfully. They've bought with friends or family or, their uncle's cousin's brother dog or whatever. But I've seen several situations where mostly siblings have bought together and they've just had completely different goals. And one of them wanted to sell and the other person didn't. And it's caused tension within relationships. You never want to fight around about money or property within your family. And in this situation, I think it's particularly relevant because these two people, these two investors are going to be very different ages. And at different ages comes a lot of different goals. You know, if they're older, maybe their goals are more working towards retirement. Maybe they do need a bit more liquidity just in case their situation changes. And in this particular instance, it's their partner's mum. So what if they break up with their partner? And, you know, what's the exit plan with all of that? So for me, there's a lot of, I guess, you know, issues from just the fact that these people have probably got very different goals in the future. And then this person has said, my concern, I would be losing out on the compound growth. Well, you're not losing out. You're just splitting the potential profits with someone else. So by splitting the profits, you know, you're not getting as much as you would have by yourself, but then you're maybe not going to have as much negative gearing because you're splitting the costs, you're splitting the stamp duty, however you want that to work. So you're actually, even though you're maybe reducing your profit in the future, you're reducing your risk and you're reducing your cost too. So you can look at it that way. And then I would also look at this situation and say, well, you know, what if you did then still take out a loan and then use that extra cash and then just buy a far better property so you could then maximize your growth potential even further. Obviously, with that comes risk as well. A lot of different, you know, routes you can go down here. And I think it'd be really important for you to both seek independent financial advice from a financial advisor just to point out all of these things at the very start and, you know, to see if this is even a place that you want to go together. And if you can't figure out an exit plan at the very beginning and have that discussion, that would become even more challenging later on when one of you does want to sell before the other one does, or, you know, there's a relationship breakdown.
And a little bit complicated as well, I guess. There's more moving parts when you've got two owners of a property and you have to split all the costs and all of that stuff. So, yeah, that's really good advice. Amy, we're a bit short on time here. So, but do send in your questions for future episodes. We'll try and cover as many of those as we can. Also, come and join us on the Rask community chat forum. So that's community.rask.com.au. Amy, if people have got questions for you on the property side of things, you're a buyer's agent down in Melbourne. How can they get hold of you?
Yeah, so my website, amylunardi.com.au, it's got all my contact details there, or reach out on Instagram or email or give me a call. I don't mind.
You're doing TikTok these days?
I know. I did TikTok briefly through COVID because there was really nothing else to do. And I think it was a bit easier because I had a few things go viral back then, but I reckon that's a pretty competitive space now. I know. I'm just a TikTok watcher these days. I'm not posting anymore.
Yeah, I try to stay off it because I don't want the kids to get ideas. But yeah. And if you want to track me down, well, follow me on Twitter and I'll try not to block you. So yeah, I can't make any promises.
Can't make any promises.
So thanks, Amy. It's brilliant advice as always. Always like doing these Q&As with you because you're very level-headed and sensible advice
that you
managed to give there. So send in more questions and we'll do more in the next week or two, and look forward to catching up next time, Amy.
See you, Pete.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.